All right, so pre-patch is well underway, and the expansion War Within comes out in about a week. So a lot of new players are coming to the game, and I wanted to refresh a lot of the videos I had that are on like timeless things such as settings, UI, add-on, stuff like that. I'm going to start that off today with settings. So this video is going to go over all the settings in the option menu, including graphics. If you're a returning or an experienced player, you probably don't need to know pretty much all of this or any of this, but there will be good video chapters and timestamps in the description. I'll try to put a tag that says new on things that I believe are like either recently added, at least in the last year or so, or new to this patch right now. All right, I'm going to go as fast as possible to not waste your time, and I'm only going to explain things that I change if it's not super obvious. Now, the very first thing I do, and this is an entirely default UI, and I've basically reset everything besides my keybinds. I am using BlizzMove add-on, so I can freely move the window around. If you haven't seen my last add-on video, that's a pretty good video to go watch. It's just about a few lightweight, really useful quality of life add-ons. Anyways, let's get on with it. All right, so the very first thing I do whenever I log in after resetting settings is turn off tutorials. For example, that's a tutorial. I don't need the game to tell me that I can click on the bag to change things about the bag. Going from top to bottom, the first thing I would change is auto loot. I want auto loot to be on with a shift key to override in case I don't want it. What auto loot do, and this is a paid actor of a rhino here just in time, is it makes it so that when you loot and loot pops up on the window, it's immediately in your bag. You don't have to think about it. The problem is that the game will manually mail you things that you'd leave on corpses arbitrarily, sometimes even gray items. So I prefer auto loot, so it's all in my control. I don't have to deal with mail. Next, I'll turn on combine bags. Guess what that does? After that, I'll change camera following style to never adjust camera. By default, it brings your camera back to a quote-unquote neutral position whenever you start moving forward. I can't stand this. I move a lot of times with my mouse, so I'm already controlling my camera. If I'm looking somewhere and wanting to move forward, that's an intentional act, and I really, really don't want the camera to be fighting me when I do it. I change to never adjust camera. If you ever need to zero back your camera, just click with both mouse buttons at once, and then your camera is centered again. Moving on to interface. You can show your name if you want to show your title. I play with this off 99% of the time. I'll also turn off friendly minions because I don't need to see what people's pets' names are. Next, I'll make sure always show nameplates is on. So if you see I uncheck this, it shows the mob's names, but not that it has health or how much health it has remaining. Always show nameplates lets you be more aware, in my opinion, of what combat mobs are around you. You can use larger nameplates. It's an accessibility option, and it's also like a small screen option. Totally up to you. Doesn't really matter. Now, I will turn nameplates on for enemy minions. This can be like a summoned totem, or just literally a guardian or like a dog that the enemy summons that's not its own mob. I like to be more aware of what the enemy is up to and not have to look for names. Nameplate motion type, set this to stacking. With overlapping nameplates, they share a clickable area. So you can see I'm spamming click here and I'm changing mobs. This is really hard because if you want to interrupt the mob that's casting, you just have to guess whichever one it's going to target. Stacking nameplates does make this a little bit uglier, moves them away, but they have defined clickable areas now. Next, I'll move straight on to raid frames. I will set this to power bars so I can see who has what resource, not just for healers, because sometimes you need to know what the tank is at, or if you have an off healing DPS, you need to know when they run out of mana and you're no longer getting healing help if you're a healer. And also display class colors so you know what class people are. That's pretty obvious. I don't need to see hunter pets, don't care about them at all. Show debuffs, keep this on. Don't check show only dispellable unless you're doing a boss that puts a permanent debuff on the entire raid that has no impact, and it's just taking up your frames. On certain bosses like that, for example, Broodkeeper is one that comes to mind, it puts a debuff on everyone in the raid, and it's just like you've lost real estate now on the frames. So only on those bosses would you check this. Display health text, I like to have it on health lost. Health remaining always shows you all these significant digits of their health. I don't really need to know that. Health lost, at a glance, you can look at how many digits of health someone is missing, and you can tell what type of heal they will need, and if they need an external. Arena enemy frames. I don't know anything about Arena. I don't really PvP other than getting the transmog, so I'm not going to comment on that. I will say, if you're PvPing, you definitely need add-ons to help you. PvPing with stock, anyone can argue that it's definitely doable. Sure. Without arms, you can get Gladiator, but that doesn't mean it's going to be easier without arms. Similarly, without add-ons, it's considerably harder, and the default arena frames leave a lot to be desired, and they're just a little bit clunky and don't really show you a lot of information. That being said, if you absolutely have to, class colors, pets, health text to percentage, and I mean, that's the best you can really do. Action bars, bare minimum, 5 of them. 3 for your spells, because classes have a lot of buttons, and 36 slots sounds like a lot of keybinds, and it definitely is, but it's not a lot of spells. And some classes, like coming to mind is Brewmaster or Holy Paladin, those classes actually might use most of these, so you need 3 just for your rotational spells. The other 2 action bars, I use them for usually toys on one, and then things that you don't really need to click on the other, like you can see here I have portals, teleports, I'll also have like flasks, food, and stuff like that. And the final thing on this screen is show numbers for cooldowns. I don't know why this isn't default. You need to know how much time is left on stuff, and the pie little radial indicator pie slice missing thing doesn't really do it for me. On to combat. So personal resource display is this thing that pops up here when you get in combat with a mob. By default, it just shows a resource and health. I will add to that show friendly buffs and show personal cooldowns. Special resources on targets is if you want to show like your combat points or your DK runes on targets. This is up to you. And then show personal cooldowns shows major DPS and some defensive cooldowns on the bars as you saw there. The only thing is that, again, default UI, this is whatever Blizzard deems is important, which sometimes either omits things that are important or includes things that you don't really need to know about. Target of target needs to be on. It just shows what the mob is targeting when you're hitting it, which is like a basic piece of information down here you can see that you need to know if you're getting hit, the tank is getting hit, or if you're the tank, if someone else is getting hit. Now this next setting, do not flash screen at low health. It gets rid of this giant red border you see around here when you drop, I believe, under 30% health. I play with this off because I'm pretty aware of my health at all times, but if you struggle to be aware of whether you're going to die soon, this is obviously a very, very obvious way to know that you're low. The only issue is you can get, I think it's called alarm desensitivity or whatever, where your screen is flashing so much because so many hits take you low, down, and higher end content that you start to completely ignore that it's flashing and it doesn't really help you at all. So yeah, just like keep in mind how that may work. Mouse over cast, I keep this on. This lets you cast spells on any friendly frame or friendly in the world by mouse overing their character, or enemy in the world without actually targeting them. So I don't have any mob targeted here. I'm going to hover this guy and cast Polymorph, and he's a sheep now. Now this is interesting because you need to be careful of where your cursor is in the world at all times. If you're not comfortable with that, obviously don't run this setting. But this makes it so that a lot of people have macros that have mouse over parameter in each macro. This makes you not have to do that at all. And with this setting on, every single spell will be treated as if it has a mouse over macro attached to it. Self-cast auto, this is really important if you're a warlock. Keep in mind that if you're out of range of a target or your line of sight of a target and you cast Soulstone on them, this will make Soulstone cast on you instead. You may opt to go with a key press, specifically if you're a warlock, because you don't want to be casting Soulstone on yourself when you intend to res someone in a critical moment. Every other class, generally keep it on auto. If you don't have this on auto, for example, if I try to buff myself with Arcane Intellect here, I like literally can't. I have to do this, then click on myself, and that's just obnoxious. So yeah, keep that on auto. Warlocks should maybe use the default, the old default, which was alt to cast on yourself, and then by default it casts on whatever you have targeted. Now, focus cast key, this is what I leave as alt. If ever you have something targeted as your focus or set as your focus, and you need to hit it with an ability, you press alt, then use it, then it does the ability. If you don't use focus, this doesn't matter. Completely up to you. Spell alert opacity is something I also set to 100. This is these little effects that various classes have for various different things. I just feel like it needs to be more visible, because Blizzard made it a spell effect, which means it's probably important. And the last thing I'll mention here, I don't personally use it, is action targeting. So the way this works is when you look at something, or something is near the focus of your in-game character, it will target it. So like as I look to this mammoth, it targets, and I look to that one and it retargets. This is kind of an accessibility feature. I know some people very specifically love to play with this because it makes it so that when something dies, especially as melee, you by default hit the thing that's next in front of you, and a lot of melee don't really care about what's happening. They just want to hit the mob in front of them. This is really good for that. I move around a lot when I'm casting spells, and sometimes I will do the thing where like you start a cast, look away, and then like continue the cast for whatever reason. This prevents you from doing that effectively because you run the risk of retargeting. Press and hold casting is also a really interesting one. This makes it so that if you want to just spam cast one spell, like for example, I go target this guy, now I can hold the fireball bind, and as soon as fireball ends, it immediately spam casts another fireball. Obviously, this only works with spells that don't have a cooldown. This isn't really practical, and it actually makes it a little bit harder if you are not casting the same spell over and over, because now you have to know when precisely to release your finger to start holding the next spell, And then eventually, when you get good at it, it basically just becomes the same as spamming the keybinds as you did before, and you don't really save a lot of like finger movements with this. Now, social. Make sure you have restrict calendar invites on at all times. This is like a really common boosting advertising spam or scam tactic to mass send invites to people. This is now default on in the game, but take extra care to make sure you never turn this off. I always turn off online and offline friends, so I don't see when a Battle.net friend is logging on and off if they're like troubleshooting their game, they're not spamming my chat. And I also turn off the friend request thing so people aren't doxing themselves when I'm recording or something. And then the last thing I do personally is I turn off mature language, and I also mature language, it's up to you if you want that on. Censor messages. I don't know what they cooked when they were doing this setting. This setting just like censors things that aren't bad, and it lets overtly bad stuff through. So I keep this off for the sake of not complicating my life. Sometimes like guildmate would be like nice DPS or something, and the game will determine it's like, oh, DPS, it's an acronym, it must mean something bad, and it will just censor it. Yeah, this setting, they were on some stuff when they made this setting, and it doesn't really do what it set out to do. And the last thing I change is chat timestamps, just so I can have the time. And then new whispers in both this chat and opening their own tab in the chat. Again, it's just convenient just to know you can see a whisper here, or you can come back to your whispers later because they're stored in their each individual tab. And a nice setting that you may want to use is the ability to automatically let guildies and Battle.net friends auto-join your queue or your dungeon. Again, use this you have to trust your friends and your guildies, but I generally keep this on because I have not yet been trolled by it. Ping system. So the things I keybind, and I didn't really want to go over keybinds too much in this video, but I always keybind. These are mouse click buttons on the Razer Naga. So I have ping bound and warning ping bound. These are all I really need because you can then hold the regular ping to get all the different options. You don't particularly need to bind more than that. And you can also just have the one bind and it would be totally fine. But pings are really, really integral to communication in the game. So I recommend binding these for sure. All right, now to some actual new settings and accessibility. So the first things I do, take off camera shake. I don't really like that. And then I put on motion sickness. It's never affected me. It's never made me unable to see something. Whenever you walk past like a giant in the game, it shakes your screen violently up and down. This solves that. And then this is now an actual set of new settings here. Cursor size. If you want a bigger, more visible cursor, you can mess with that. I personally do not. Self-highlight. You can set it to have your character always display this circle at their feet. You can set it so that your character has an outline, or you can set it so that your character has a raid marker. This is only visible to you. Then if you also have a target marker icon, it will overwrite it. I will choose to set this to circle and outline. This shows as such, and it just makes your character a little bit more visible, especially if you're playing something like a shadow priest or like a druid that can easily blend into its surroundings. This is just going to be a little bit nicer to get more visibility in combat and in more cluttered situations. Also, show silhouette when obscured. Also something that's very new. If your character goes behind something but your camera does not, it lets you see your character as a silhouette outlined. It is dark, and on dark objects it's not the greatest, but it's better than nothing. And it's a really nice setting that just lets you be a little bit more cognizant of where your character is at any time. And the final thing I'll change before we go to graphic settings is, so by default with Dragonriding, or I guess it's now called Skyriding, is there are all these like cool screen effects, and it's subjectively cool. It's kind of annoying to me. I just don't like when my screen has lots and lots of motion because I feel like sometimes, it doesn't really matter for Dragonriding, but it's just like a little more annoying, and I'm really aware of like movement on the screen or icons popping up. And I think that whenever you have a screen that has a bunch of crap going on it, you generally will start to become like tolerant of the random things on your screen, and then it will make you start ignoring things that are actually important that you may want to see. Doesn't really matter for Dragonriding, but I turn the speed effects and the screen effects off. That way now, whenever I Dragon Ride, it's like nice and calm. All right, now to graphic settings. Most of this doesn't really do anything. If your performance is bad, try updating the slider, and then you can, for the most part, go from like a top-down approach with they've generally put the more intensive things at the top and the least intensive things at the bottom, generally. The only thing I'd say is make sure particle density is never disabled. Make sure spell density is never set to dynamic, and then make sure projected textures is never off. Whenever you lower these settings a lot, it will sometimes change some of these things. Like for example, on the lows, it turns projected textures off, which is crazy. Here's a comparison of particle density. It basically changes the amount of sparkle and the, surprisingly, density of the spells that you see for both mechanics and player targeted spells. Now, in this comparison, there's not too much to see. Things I'd point out is that most effects on the ground now have just a little bit more sparkle and sheen to it on the ultra settings, and on the lower settings, they're just more plain and simple and more of a texture, less of a spell effect. The big thing to put it in this comparison is that look at melee on the ultra side, it's almost impossible to tell what's going on in melee, when on the lower settings, it's generally more manageable to see what's on the ground in melee, what each individual melee players are doing. So if you're melee, put particle density lower. This is just the first setting I would say whenever you can see too much stuff and it's like obscuring your vision in a fight, or you can't see something, go to particle density immediately and see if that setting will change and improve your situation. Projected textures, this used to be all the swirlies and telegraphs on the ground. Now, Blizzard has been good with updating their mechanics so that this one setting doesn't govern. This barely affects performance, and you can see only in specific cases like on this boss here. This arcane orb this boss shoots sucks people in based on where the orb is landing. However, with projected textures disabled, you can't see where the orb is landing, and that's just really bad. So keep this on all the time. For most modern bosses, it shouldn't really matter, but Blizzard has been bringing back old dungeons, and it's a matter of time before they bring back old raids, and sometimes a lot of these old mechanics aren't properly updated, and projected textures does not work. Now, spell density controls how many other player spells that you're seeing that the game deems as either essential or non-essential. I would say set this on whatever your heart desires, just don't set it to dynamic. Problem with it being dynamic is that certain key spells like Anti-Magic Zone or Spirit Link Totem, or generally anything that's helpful, will change based on, like, the actual visual of the spell will be different in spell density based on what this is set at. And the last thing you want is whenever you're getting FPS spikes or FPS drops in a raid, for all the spells to start changing randomly mid-fight. That's really, really bad. Keep this on everything if you want. Keep this on essential if you want. The important thing is for your own comfort and like familiarity with the game. Don't change this a lot, and for sure, do not put this on dynamic. It's really bad. And the last thing, now, most of these settings are just, there are too many systems, too many PCs for me to like go and give my recommendations on each graphical thing. You're much better off just doing the research yourself, unfortunately. There are certain obvious things that are like a preference. For example, you can have VSync on or off if you can handle, or if you have screen tearing or adaptive refresh rate or not. If you have an NVIDIA card, you can have reflex plus boost for low latency input. It doesn't really do that much in the game. Probably gets you like a 30 milliseconds or so in WoW, which is in WoW, in a shooter, that's a lot. In WoW, that's not a lot at all. And then moving on, the last things I would change, and this is just purely subjective, but I always change contrast, brightness, and gamma to specifically 6240 and a 1.1. Here's an example of what this scenery looks like with default, set to 50/50 and 1. And then this is what it looks like if I set it to 62, 48, and 1.1. It doesn't change much. I just think that it looks a little bit nicer, a little bit more vibrant, a little bit more contrast, but you can easily overcook these settings, so try not to move the sliders around too much. These are just the sliders I have settled on after a few years of fiddling with them. And the very, very final setting you should change is turn advanced combat logging on. This is required by a few add-ons, especially logging, obviously, but things like the Raider.io client and other third-party apps that you may use either work better or need this setting on to work at all. It does say this may cause additional network lag. I've tested this and my network activity was completely unaffected, but obviously your mileage may vary. Now that's it for the default Blizzard settings. The last thing I would advise you to do is to install an add-on called Advanced Interface Options. Now if you've seen my recent video, you already know about this, but this does not add any new settings to the game. This just lets you use Blizzard settings that are hidden, or like you need a command line interface script to get to the settings. Some of the nice things you can do with Advanced Interface Options, for example, player names. If you have player names enabled, you can turn off the ability to see titles or guilds if you just want to see names, or you can more simply just turn off titles just so you can see the name and the guild itself. You can also, by the default, cleanup bags does some funky stuff. You can reverse the cleanup of the bags to have the orientation of where it puts things inverted if you like it on the top or the bottom. There's an easy checkbox here to show Lua errors so you can investigate what add-on's bugging out whenever an update goes live. Another really important thing here is the camera distance. So the max camera distance in the game is this. You can just use this slider to set it to a little bit more, which is just a little bit nicer, or you can even make it smaller for whatever reason. Again, this is not a new setting. This is a command line in the game, but it's just much easier done with this very, very lightweight add-on. And the final thing this add-on does is cast action on keybind down. So by default in the game, if I want to cast Shifting Power here, you can see if I press 1 on my keyboard, nothing happens. Only when you release does it actually cast by default. Now, tons of add-ons change this to be a default setting that's just already checked, so you may not have to worry about it. It's just that if your keybinds only apply whenever you let up on the keybind, you have like a 20 to 100 millisecond delay on every single key, which just invokes a little bit of lag. And the final thing that might be useful in advanced interface options is the ability to add scrolling combat text for specific things. So for example, if you're doing like a reputation farm and you want to keep track of your reputation, yes, you can set it as your experience bar, but you can also do this, and then whenever you gain a rep, it'll pop up in the middle of your screen, kind of like if you receive a heal. But again, advanced interface options just lets you access things and lets you change default Blizzard things. There is no new things added in this add-on. But that's pretty much going to be it. I think I covered all the settings. I didn't go into keybinds because I don't know if I want to make a video on keybinds. I feel like it's way, way, way too subjective. And the fact that my keybinds are only going to apply to people who have an MMO mouse with buttons on the side means that it's even more niche. So if you want that video, comment below. Let me know what the vibe is on that. I'll just proceed as normal otherwise, though. That's pretty much going to be it. Thanks for watching. Later.